The Midnight Caller. In October 2016, Emma packed up her life in Los Angeles and left the city for good. It wasn't a decision she had made lightly. After years of enduring a dead-end corporate job, the constant hum of traffic, and a breakup that left her emotionally drained, she felt suffocated. Her therapist had suggested a change of scenery. "You need to step away from everything and find yourself again," Dr. Collins had said during their last session. "Isolation might give you the clarity you need." Emma had taken the advice literally. She found a listing for a cabin in Ashland, Oregon, tucked deep within the Rogue River National Forest. The photo showed a cozy, two-bedroom wooden structure with a stone fireplace and a wraparound porch. The ad emphasized its remoteness, perfect for artists, writers, and those seeking solitude. It was exactly what Emma needed. The landlord, an older man named Mr. Fletcher, had been hesitant to rent it out at first. "It's not for everyone," he'd said over the phone. "You'll be out there on your own. Nearest neighbor is a mile away, and there's no cell service in those parts. The landline works, though." Emma assured him she was ready. She wasn't scared of being alone, she was scared of staying in Los Angeles and losing herself completely. The drive to Ashland was long but scenic. Emma felt a sense of peace as she left the sprawling city behind, replaced by winding mountain roads and towering pine trees. By the time she reached the cabin, the sun was setting, casting golden light across the clearing. The cabin looked exactly like the photos, quaint, almost storybook-like, with smoke curling from the stone chimney. But as Emma stepped out of her car and into the crisp autumn air, a strange unease settled over her. It wasn't the isolation, she had prepared for that. It was something about the cabin itself. The way it seemed to blend too perfectly into the forest, as if it had grown there rather than been built. The way the windows caught the fading light and reflected it back in distorted fragments. She brushed the feeling aside and began unpacking. The cabin was even smaller on the inside than it looked from the outside. The living room was dominated by the stone fireplace, with a worn leather couch and a small coffee table. The kitchen was functional but outdated, with avocado green appliances that looked like they hadn't been replaced since the 1970s. Upstairs, the two bedrooms were sparsely furnished, each with a bed, a nightstand, and a single lamp. As Emma explored, she noticed odd details. The floorboards creaked in strange, rhythmic patterns, as if footsteps echoed her every move. The walls had faint marks, scratches, perhaps, or faded stains, that seemed too deliberate to be random. And then there was the rotary phone, mounted on the wall in the kitchen. It was out of place, an antique relic in an otherwise updated cabin. Emma picked up the receiver out of curiosity. The dial tone buzzed faintly in her ear. She hung it back up. On the mantel above the fireplace was an old black and white photograph in a wooden frame. It showed a family standing in front of the cabin, a man, a woman, and a little girl. They were smiling, but their faces were blurry, as if smudged over time. Emma wondered why the landlord had left it there. By the time she finished unpacking, night had fallen. The forest outside was eerily quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive stillness. Emma locked the doors and windows, drew the curtains, and settled onto the couch with a cup of tea and her laptop. She managed to connect to the cabin's weak Wi-Fi and queued up a movie to drown out the silence. It was just past 10:30 p.m. when the phone rang. Emma jumped, nearly spilling her tea. She stared at the rotary phone on the wall, its sharp mechanical trill slicing through the quiet cabin. Who could possibly be calling? She hadn't given the number to anyone, and Mr. Fletcher hadn't mentioned expecting any calls. Hesitantly, she walked over and picked up the receiver. "Hello," she said, her voice uncertain. There was no response. Just static. "Hello," she repeated, louder this time. Then she heard it, a faint, slow breathing. Her heart began to race. "Who is this?" she demanded. A deep, gravelly voice whispered through the static, "I'm inside." Emma froze. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. "What did you say?" The line went dead. Her hands trembled as she hung up the phone. She stared at it, waiting for it to ring again. But the cabin was silent. The only sound was the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Emma told herself it had to be a prank call. Maybe someone in town had found the number. She double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, then went upstairs to her bedroom, leaving the lights on downstairs. That night Emma couldn't and #039 sleep at all. Every creak of wood, every sound of wind made her jump. She kept repeating the voice from the call in her mind. It was so deliberate and eerie that it was impossible not to be afraid. The next morning Emma decided to look around the hut. The forest surrounding the hut was dense and eerie. Nearby, she found an old shed vehicle that was not in use. Inside was a broken rocking chair, rusted garden tools and a pile of old newspapers. The top newspaper was dated 1982. The headline made Emma and #039's blood run cold. Family lost in remote shed, no clues found. Emma felt sick to her stomach. The news was about a man, his wife, and their young daughter who had mysteriously disappeared. Emma couldn't and #039 find the name of the cottage, but she thought of the old photograph above the fireplace. Could it be the same family? When Emma returned to the cabin, she went straight to the photograph. As she picked it up, a chill ran down her spine. The woman in the photo, she could have sworn the night before, her face had been blurry. Now it was completely clear. And she wasn't smiling anymore. That night, the phone rang again. Emma didn't want to answer it, but the sound was relentless. It echoed through the cabin, growing louder with each ring. Finally, she picked up. The same static greeted her, followed by the same deliberate breathing. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The voice returned, colder and more menacing. "I told you. I'm inside." This time, Emma didn't hang up. "Where are you?" she shouted. "What do you want?" The line went dead. Emma's fear turned to anger. She grabbed a flashlight and the knife she kept in the kitchen, determined to search the entire cabin. She checked every corner, every closet, every shadow. But there was no one there. Then she noticed the photograph on the mantel again. The little girl's face was gone, replaced by a smooth, featureless surface. The next morning, Emma tried to call Mr. Fletcher, but her phone had no signal, and the rotary phone refused to dial out. Desperate, she decided to drive into town. But when she stepped outside, she froze. The driveway was gone. Where there had once been a dirt path leading to the main road, there was now only forest. Thick, impenetrable trees surrounded the cabin on all sides. It was as if the world had shifted overnight, trapping her. Emma stumbled back inside, her mind racing. She tried the phone again, but there was only static. The walls of the cabin seemed to close in around her, the air growing heavier. She felt like she was being watched. That night, the voice came again, not through the phone, but from the shadows of the living room. You can't leave, Emma. You belong to us now. Weeks later, a hiker found the cabin, seemingly abandoned. Inside, there was no sign of Emma. But on the mantle, the photograph had changed again. The little girl's face was still missing. And now, Emma's face was in its place.